we have two tasks to be done. Firstly, registering available phone lines or channels, and secondly, registering the extensions. Let's suppose this phone company has two subscribers, Bob and Alice. By registering phone line for Bob, for example, basically we're providing all the necessary information to the switch, such that the switch knows where to send the signal to whenever a call needs to be made to Bob. The phones we have in our lab are SIP phones, so the type of channel we will have to configure is SIP channels. In Asterisk, we configure those channels in this file. Please watch while I'm configuring it. First, let's add the description of the channel for Bob. We go to the end of the file and add these lines. What we have here inside the square bracket is the name of the entity, in this case Bob. The type here is friend, which means Bob, or more accurately Bob handset, will be able to receive calls from and make calls to the Asterisk. The other valid value is peer, which means the entity is the one Asterisk will be making calls to. This is usually used for connecting Asterisk to a SIP provider for outbound calls. You know, one way of saving costs for long-distance calls is to configure your Asterisk such that when a person inside the company dials a long-distance number, the call will be routed through a SIP provider. The other option is user, which means the entity can only make calls to the Asterisk but not receiving calls. Alright, then there's the host property, whose values here we set to dynamic. This tells the Asterisk where to find the client, the handset. The value can be an IP address or a host name, but if it's dynamic, the value will be determined dynamically upon registration. Remember, you can configure your SIP phones to register itself to the SIP server when you turn it on. This is how the SIP server knows the location of the SIP phone. While we are at it, let's modify the can reinvite property. By default, it is set to yes, which means once the caller and the callee start talking, Asterisk will remove itself from the voice transmission path and only listens to the SIP signal. But because we want to utilize Asterisk as a media gateway, which we expect to stay in the path of voice transmission, we need to change the value to no. To allow subscribers to be called by number, we need to register extensions. In Asterisk, the extensions are configured in this file. So, I want to assign the number 1000 for Bob and 2000 for Alice. Please watch while I configure it in the extension.conf. Now, let's verify the installation and configuration by making a test call. But first, we need to install the SIP phones. There are several free options available, such as Xlite, or Mercuro, or Eckiga, that's for Linux, or SG Phone, and many others. In this tutorial, we'll be using SG Phone, that's from SG Labs. Those SIP phones have one thing in common when it comes to configuration. You normally would have to specify the SIP proxy and the SIP registration options. I'll show you how to do it in the SG Phone. In SG Phone, we can maintain several connection profiles, but we can only use one of them. I already have the profile for connecting to our Asterisk, which I'm going to show you. In your case, you will have to create a new profile. In this tab, we specify the address of the SIP proxy. Well, in the case of SG Phone, we have to write it in the format of SIP URI. We want all the calls made from this SG Phone to go through the Asterisk. In other words, Asterisk is our SIP proxy. So we type in the address of our Asterisk server here. Then in this tab, we specify the SIP registration options. Just mark this checkbox to instruct the SIP phone to try registering itself to the registration server. In many cases, the registration server is at the same address as the proxy server. Just like in our case, Asterisk also plays the role as the registration server. But if it's on a different address, just mark this checkbox and type in the address of the registration server here. When you click the OK button here, SG Phone will prompt you for the authentication info. This information will be passed on to the registration server. Don't forget to click on this Use Profile button to activate your profile of choice. SJPhone at this point sends the register request to the registration server. Now back to the Asterisk. If you successfully followed the installation instruction 100% and restarted your Linux server, you will have Asterisk running already. Check it using the ps command. Otherwise, you can bring up Asterisk using this command or this command. Now let's get into the Asterisk console using this command. Because we just made some change to the SIP configuration in the SIPconf and the dial plan in the extension.conf, we need to tell Asterisk to reload them. Here's how we do it. Initially, neither Bob or Alice is active. They haven't turned on their SIP phones. There is no registration. You can verify it using this command. Now let me start Bob's phone. Alright, see, now Asterisk knows how to reach Bob's handset. It's on the IP 101. I'll do the same thing with Alice's phone now. There it is. It's running on IP 100. Finally, time to make the call. I'll be acting as Bob, making a call to Alice. Here, on Bob's phone, I type in the destination address as a SIP array that is composed of the extension of Alice 2000 and the IP of the Asterisk. Well, actually, because we already configured the SJPhone to use Asterisk as the SIP proxy, we can drop the IP part. In fact, we can drop everything else except the extension number that we want to dial. The SJPhone will translate it to the complete SIP array just like what we type here.
Bueno, soy Alice. ¿Quién habla? ¿Quién habla? ¿Eres tú, Bob? No me eres tú, Bob. Te extraño. Regrésate a mí. Ah.
Interesting to note here, Alice's handset is using MULO as the codec for the voice signal, while Bob's handset is using GSM. Asterisk, being the media gateway, does the cross conversion. Okay, Bob hung up. Couldn't stand the drama. That's it. But what about the SIP application server? Well, we will test the SIP application server when we deploy our first SIP Servlet. That's in chapter 4, shortly after this.